Hunter Jr. grew up on a farm in Moultrie, Georgia. The son of a South Georgia farmer, Hunter enlisted in the United States Marine Corps after graduating from high school, following in the footsteps of family members who had served in World War II. He went through Marine Corps basic training at Parris Island, South Carolina in 1962, and the next year was in Vietnam as a radioman with the 1st Marine Air Wing Pathfinder platoon. Hunter spent 4 tours in Vietnam, performing multiple duties, culminating as a naval gunfire spotter, while also gaining valuable on-the-job training during aerial observer missions in the Thomas Morse O-19 and the O-1 Bird Dog. Eventually, Hunter became a full-time aerial observer, crisscrossing between coasts in the United States, and eventually was assigned to Marine Observation Squadron 2, the unit he deployed with to Iraq during the Gulf War. In November 1990, Hunter's squadron, VMO-2, received the word to deploy to Saudi Arabia in support of Operation Desert Storm. On the morning of January 18, 1991, Hunter's OV-10 Bronco, piloted by Lieutenant Colonel Cliff Acree, was shot down by a surface-to-air missile in Kuwait. Injured from the ejection, Hunter and Acree were unable to evade and were captured by the Iraqi unit in the area. Both Hunter and Acree would spend 47 days in captivity, enduring torture and starvation. On the night of 24 February 1991, Hunter's cell was rattled by an explosion. An F-117 Nighthawk had bombed the prison facility in Baghdad where Hunter and fellow POWs were held. The bombing was so intense that it blew the transit windows out of the walls and buckled the prison doors. No POW was injured in the bombing, and they were relocated to another detention facility. On 5 March 1991, Hunter and his fellow POWs were released and reunited with their families. Hunter would go on to serve 3 more years in the VMO squadrons until the OV-10 Bronco was retired in 1995. At the time, Hunter was the longest-serving and most experienced aerial observer in the United States Marine Corps. Chief Warrant Officer Guy Hunter retired with 32 years of distinguished service in the U.S. Marine Corps.
Ladies and gentlemen, please join us in welcoming to the stage Chief Warrant Officer Guy Hunter.
Good afternoon. It's a real pleasure being here. When I first got invited to come down and join you folks for this gathering, I looked up the history of the Gathering of Eagles, and I got to tell you, I felt a little out of place coming down here with people like Robin Olds and all those guys, and Chuck Yeager, and the first George Bush. I said, this is a exalted company and a little above my level here, above my pay grade. But I'm happy to be here regardless and talk to you folks. I've been told to give you my viewpoint of my experiences from Operation Desert Storm, and so that's what I'll try to do. It all started in 1990. My wife and I had just gotten transferred back to the West Coast from the East Coast, and because they thought I was going to retire out there soon and they were going to save some money. And so I got out to the West Coast, and we started training as usual in the VMO-2 squadron. And within a couple of weeks, I'd been out jogging and came back to the hangar at noon, and I got the word to we were going to deploy and head over to Southeast Asia, and for me to pack my stuff, whatever I wanted to take, and get up to El Toro, the air station there, and get on a C-130, which was heading out that afternoon to that area, and because I was going to be on the advanced party and get over there before the rest of the squadron and start trying to set things up. So I drove by the house, collected my wife, and I said, I hope you know how to get back from El Toro because I'm leaving. And she said, "Oh, you'll be back in 3 or 4 weeks." I said, "No, dear, I think this time it's going to be a little longer than that. I think they're a little serious this time." So she dropped me. I got to El Toro, turned the truck over to her, gave her a little kiss goodbye, and said, "I'll see you soon." And walked out. The C-130 was already turning. Got on a plane, and away we went. So I got over to Saudi Arabia, and my field eventually, King Abdulaziz, about toward the end of August and September, early September, and it was hot as blazes there, of course, in that time of year. And started immediately getting organized, and the rest of the air group started trickling in. We had ended up with like 3 squadrons of Harriers at our place, and eventually 2 squadrons of OV-10s there. And so I was 2 jobs at the same time. I was the assistant ops in for the group, for the Marine Air Group, and also assistant ops guy for our squadron. So I was back and forth getting all of our boards and radios and communications set up and that sort of thing. As soon as the squadron arrived, we were fully ashore. We started lots of good training with the armor units that were nearby, and also with some ground units, and making sure our communications were working, and with the Anglico unit up at Kofji was in that area there, and they were up on the front lines. And just getting ready to go to war. Then we finally got the word we were going to start on the 16th or so. And so I was the OPSO, really, and so I started writing the schedule. I wrote the schedule for the very next morning, and put myself and Colonel Acree on the first dawn launch, and tried to get a few hours of sleep. And before I went to bed, though, I was telling General Horner earlier, I went outside at night around midnight, and the most stupendous sight I've ever seen in my life, a flow of aircraft just heading north. You know, you could see the lights coming. They didn't, of course, they weren't going to turn the lights off till they went through their combat checklist going into the enemy areas, but it was such an impressive thing as I had ever seen. Alongside that, before we actually went on our first mission, a few weeks before, when the General Schwarzkopf was planning his famous left hook around the Iraqi forces, we were flying around on the OV-10s and checking the elbow at Kuwait and making sure nothing was out of the ordinary. But you could look out to the west of us there, and it was almost like a river, a huge river of armor and armored vehicles and trucks and troops just moving north out there. I mean, it was a most massive show of military force that I've ever been allowed to see in my life, and I doubt I'll ever see anything like that again in my age. But back to the story. We took off at dawn, and as soon as we took off and checked in with the controlling agencies, they said some Iraqi batteries were firing on our forces from southern Kuwait. So we immediately went straight north into southern Kuwait and started looking for them, and found them readily enough. And we thought, man, it was like pork chops hanging out there to eat. They were spread out in a row, no camouflage whatsoever. And they were saying, "Come and kill us." And I called back to tried to go through our desk. We didn't get a response. So, in the OV-10s, we have HF radios. And then in our radio room, I made sure we had an HF radio, because those things come in handy sometimes. So I called back to the squadron radio room, and I said, "I want you to go down to group, right down the hallway from us, and tell them to start sending us some Harriers in flights of 4, because I said, we know where the Iraqi artillery batteries are. Here's their position, and as soon as you send me some Harriers, we can just knock the snot out of them." So in a very few minutes after that, I heard the Harriers start checking in, and we parked them about 12,000 feet right off the coastline. And as soon as I gave them a real quick brief and told them where I'd be, we rolled in and fired a Zuni Willie Pete marking rocket. And then the Harriers started rolling in and went through their 2,000-pound bombs first. And as soon as they expended all those on those 2 Iraqi artillery batteries, they were out of Winchester on their bombs. they started, I had them start rolling in with their 25 millimeter cannons, and several runs, and you could see the hits from the 25 millimeter cannon shots just twinkling all around where the Iraqis were. And I mentioned this earlier, they destroyed those 2 batteries. They were knocking the guys running around like ass over tea kettle in there. And so we cleaned those up, and by this time we were about running a little low on fuel, so another OV-10 showed up to take over doing it, and they continued doing this sporadically throughout the day in that area, and had some good results on it. And so we went back, and I went back up to the ops desk and took over the desk again and started trying to think about writing the schedule for the next day, because by that time we really only had 6 OV-10s at the time. VMO2 was arriving that morning with their OV-10s, so we were trying to integrate them into our schedule at the same time. And it was a little tussle trying to figure out who's going to do what there for a while. But I went ahead and wrote Colonel Akery and myself into the dawn launch again, and we took off the next morning at the break of dawn. And this time they said there were some Iraqi rocky batteries up in the area, so we drove on up, started looking for them, and found them readily enough, and called back to the airborne control folks, and they told us in a few minutes there were some A-10s on the way. And I said, great, that's 30 millimeter cannons that look good down there today on that stuff. And in a few minutes, though, we were taking another real quick peek in there and got in a little too far, I guess, because they opened up with us and everything, and then we got hit with I assume from talking to the air defense guys, might have been an SA-8 that hit us, and it hit the left side of the plane, blew the engine off, knocked a big hole through the my helmet, through the canopy, and blew my helmet off, and knocked me unconscious at the time. And so I came to in a few seconds, I guess, and we were going downhill. The aircraft was on fire, which, like I said earlier to somebody, it brings back the old adage, the only time you have too much fuel on your plane is when it's on fire. So I tried to grab the stick and pull back. Stick was stuck because the OV-10 has dual controls in it, which is a good thing in my viewpoint. And it wouldn't move, so I thought I gotta eject. And so I went and grabbed the ring and lost consciousness again. Next thing I knew, I come to in a parachute because Colonel Akery had ejected both of us, fortunately. And next thing I knew, I'm drifting down in a parachute, and I was about 2,000 feet, right in the middle of an Iraqi infantry division with their trenches everywhere down there. And I thought for a second, because I used to be in an airborne unit where we could steer our parachutes a little bit. And I was going to head for the Gulf, and as soon as I saw that, it was so far away, I said, that's it. I guess I'm in for it now. And landed, shucked all of my stuff, and tried to use those survival radios to start calling Mayday. Nobody ever answered. Never heard a soul, either one of us, in our survival radios. In a few minutes, the Iraqis showed up in one of their trucks, and we went through the old rifles with the hands up deal, and they searched us a little bit and took away my handy dandy 9mm pistol, And I actually had somebody ask me one time, why don't you shoot them and just kill them all and get away? And I said, that's in the movies. This is real life. And we went through they took us in a truck to like a battalion place, battalion CP, and their version of a corpsman came out and bandaged us both up. I had been hit in the face a couple of places, and Akery hit the side of the head. He's bleeding profusely too, and they just bound us up and didn't say a word to us. They put us back in the truck and took us up to like a division headquarters because it was underground. Big, huge room, carpeted, chairs, tables, everything. And we stood around in there for a while, and got asked by one of their Iraqi officers. He came over and he said, he asked me, "What airfield do you come from?" And I said, "I don't think I'm supposed to tell you that." And he said, "Okay," and that was it. No more questioning. I thought, holy cow. So we stayed there for a while, and then they bandaged us back up, put some handcuffs on this time, and drove us up to like a Corps headquarters, I guess it was. And they started, they were ticked because we'd just been bombing the hell out of them the day before. And so they took a few whacks at us and started beating on us. And I thought they were going to kill us for a while there because I could hear them like spreading paper on the floor, blindfolded, you know. And then they made us kneel down. I could have sworn I heard some sabers being drawn out of the sheaths, you know, because that's one of their things, is beheading for some strange reason. But they didn't. They just yelled at us a lot and beat us a few times. And finally, they threw us in the back of a vehicle, and we started driving off towards Basra. What really worried me at this point, I had been down to the group ops office just the night before. We were planning our next strikes for that morning, and they were planning Harriers hitting that area in there. And all I could think about was a bunch of Harriers showing up and seeing a beautiful moving target, you know, to go knock us out. I was sweating bullets over that one. But bombing was all around us. They were hitting various places. Nothing ever came really close to us, just uncomfortably close. And we went on and got into Basra, and they took us into another place, like an interrogation room there, and we stayed overnight. They threw in a couple of Italians with us, the tornado drivers, and they questioned us a little bit. And to my dying day, I'll never forget Jeff Tice, who was a major in the Air Force. He was an F-16 driver, I think it was. And they were in there questioning him, and he was just plain out bullshitting them, just making up crap like out of the movies, you know. And the Iraqi, Iraqi officer that was interrogating him, he finally said, "Stop." And he said to Jeff, "Listen, you can tell me anything you want, and I'll write it down. I don't care." He said, "But when you get to Baghdad, don't you try that with them." He said, "You'll get in big trouble there." Jeff said, "Okay." So we spent the night, and they brought in a couple of Italians and a couple of other guys too. And the only thing about the nighttime was one of the Italians was hurt a little bit, and they would come into our little holding cell once a night and just kick him a few times, just to have a little fun with him, make him scream a little bit. We got up the next day. They put us on another vehicle. We eventually arrived in Baghdad to, I guess, one of their main interrogation centers. It was a huge complex, way underground. We walked down a ramp for a long time. You could hear the fans blowing for ventilation in there. And we stayed there for several days in this place. We were tied up, handcuffed and blindfolded, just lying on the concrete floor. And as it turns out, the airstrikes from our air forces just kept rolling in. And you could hear first, at that time, the sirens going off around here. And then you would hear the missiles, like I think SA-3s, lifting off and making huge noises. We could hear from the outside. And then you could hear a faint sense of the jet noises coming in. And I'm assuming it was night by then because I was blindfolded. And I think it was F-117s perhaps. And then the bombs hitting, just marching closer and closer throughout the area there. And then power went out a couple of times. The fans would stop. And the Iraqis would start screaming and yelling. And then a few minutes, the fans would come back on again, the ventilation fans. This place was a rugged place, and we got our first taste of real, what we figured was Iraqi interrogations from their intelligence folks, which their usual method was just beat the hell out of you and ask you questions and beat the hell out of you again there. And it was terrifying in some points because I could hear Colonel Aker down there just suffering. And this went on pretty much all night. There was a couple of other guys in there with us. And it continued through the next day or so. And the one thing about their interrogations, though, was it was idiotic. They were ignorant. You know, Colonel Aker was right here down the road from me in this hallway, And when they took him in, they wouldn't ask him a question and come ask me the same thing to verify it. They'd ask different questions all the time, and they never did anything to check it out and see if it was true or not. We were just lying through our asses on here, making stuff up. I mean, how many troops you got? I don't know, 2 million, 500,000, I don't know. You know? And I was even old looking then, you know, so for a while they thought I was a general. I had a hard time persuading them when I was an ignorant warrant officer. So anyway, they interrogated us for a while there, and then they finally put us in another vehicle at nighttime, and because I could look down now underneath my little bandage here around my eyes, and they put some urine-soaked blankets on top of us and moved us out to another prison. And we got there, and it was like they put us in solitary confinement, and this place was like an old fort from Beaugest, old crumbling thing you see in the old movies with the French Foreign Legion guys, and they had bars in the windows, but there were no other windows, no coverings, no glass, no anything, just open bars. And so over the next few days, I got a pretty good idea who was in this location with us, and got to see a few guys walking around occasionally in there. They were leading them around. But here, two things happened that made me very encouraged. One was they left us alone. You know, they would come in there in the morning and see if we were there, and then they would give us a little bowl of gruel, and once they gave a chunk of some rancid meat to eat, and then they would let us go to their little version of a bathroom down the hallway where we could dump out our pitcher from the night before with the stuff in it and fill it with some water, take it, and they'd make us go back to the cell. And so that was encouraging. They left us alone. No damage here. The other thing that encouraged me, and I wasn't alone in this, the other guys were thinking like this too, as I found out, is that I came to the conclusion that these Iraqis were not going to be able to sustain this kind of assault very long. And in my mind at the time, I thought 3 months they could hold out. As it turned out, it was half that time, because the planes were coming in every night. And remember, I said a while ago the sirens would start. Pretty soon there were no more sirens. You just hear the sounds of jets approaching, and then the bombs falling, and then the missiles started lifting off, and the anti-aircraft shooting up into the sky. So evidently our counter missions against their radars and early warning systems and surface-to-air systems were having a really good effect upon them. So I was encouraged by that. I said they can't sustain that kind of damage. It was just horrendous with the air raids rolling in there. Things were going along, I thought, pretty good in my viewpoint, except the bombing was getting closer. It scared the hell out of me there. And so then a few nights later, right around toward the end of January, the Iraqi guards showed up one night with their higher-ups, and they rounded us all up, put us into another vehicle, and took us out to another prison, which we called the Biltmore, because it was a nice, big, huge brick building. That's the nickname they got for it. And they threw us into solitary again. I didn't have any blankets for a while there. They didn't give me any, and I was freezing in there, just shaking. I thought I was going to freeze to death for a while. It was so cold up there in Iraq in late January, shaking continuously. And this is where the treatment got rough, and the other treatment too, because they essentially stopped feeding us. And I was lucky if I got a nice, almost a pint of water a day and a piece of bread, you know. And sometimes it'd be a little bowl of some thin gruel. You could look and see through it. But I would make it stretch as long as I could. And that piece of bread they gave us, I'd take it and make it last half a day, you know, nibbling little pieces off of it. So, so in combination with that, they were taking us down for interrogation again, and literally just beating us. Like I said before, they didn't check questions with any other prisoners. So these guys were not intelligent of this kind of thing. You know, their government, those higher ups, they were brutes and thugs is all they were. They didn't know how to run a war machine. they didn't have the training that you folks had at all. And so they just try to beat it out of you, I guess, is all they could do. Anyway, it was a struggle there for a while. I was, completely knocked unconscious a few times, and they'd kick me in the head. But and then I got weaker and weaker from this lack of food, and I was in my jail cell from laying on that little thin blanket on the floor that they finally gave us. I had 2 thin blankets. I put one on the floor and lay on the other. It was just an old brick cell. And I started eventually feeling pain around my thighs and my back. And I was scratching it, and I had some huge sores erupted there and oozing things out of it. And, of course, I had no sanitation, no water, so I just had to wipe it off with my hands and smear it on the walls to get rid of it. And then in addition to that, too, I got an eye infection really bad, and I had a hard time getting my eyes open to see out of them every day. And so it was about that time I started, and then I stopped walking around in the cell every day because I was losing energy. I didn't want to waste energy doing that. So I just sat there in the corner waiting for time to pass by. And just reflected on a lot of things. And one thing on the wall, this had been a prison for a long time apparently. Some previous prisoner years ago had scratched into the bricks a little etching of, I guess, him pushing a little baby carriage down a road with some trees in the background. Had to be one of the prisoners they kept in there. I didn't know what happened to him, never would know. I assumed they finally killed him. They're good at killing people, but not good at fighting a war, is what I'm trying to get at here. We had another really bad night there on February the 14th when our guys attacked an intelligence center of some kind, but the Iraqis, their officers, had stashed a lot of their women and children in there, and the bomb entered that plane and killed a bunch of them, and so that infuriated them a lot. So they came around to all the cells that night after that and just started beating the hell out of us again, every one at a time. You could hear them coming down the hallway. The cell door would open. You hear beating and screaming, and then they'd come to the next one and start all over again. And then back and forth to the interrogation rooms too. So lying there at night got to be a little tense sometimes in the floor because it's deadly quiet in this place, and you could hear somebody walking down the hallway. First thing you wanted to know, were they heading your way? And you could hear them getting closer. Then the next thing you know was their key ring jingling, because somebody's being taken out if there is a key ring jingling. And then they got closer and closer, and I just, all right, my turn again. So we'd go down to their interrogation room, and they'd go through the same thing again. And eventually, I guess they got tired of it there, because they would ask, they had like a routine where they said, this is Lieutenant Ahmed's time to go interrogate you. So he'd come in and open up a folder, and he'd say, what is your name? What is your stuff? What is this? The same thing over and over. He'd fill out his paperwork, and he'd just get up and leave. And nothing good about it. Same kinds of questions. Some new ones showed up, like how can we protect our tanks? And how the hell do I know? I said, bury them in the desert. And he wrote down, bury them in the desert, I guess. And so he left, and I knew I was in for a hard time, though. By now it was February the 24th, and I was really getting shaky on my legs by now. And this interrogation this time was sort of rough. And during the interrogation, they said, you are not helping us. We will interview you again tomorrow. And for every bad question, every bad answer you give us, we're going to cut off one of your fingers. And then they took me back to my cell. And when they got to my cell and they undid my handcuffs and took my blindfold off, they hung it on the hook outside the cell door. So I knew they were coming back again tomorrow, and that didn't bode well for me. So I sat down on my little blanket in the corner, and I actually dozed off. And your mind does wonderful things for you sometimes as a defensive mechanism. So I sat there, and I had this dream. I was back home driving my car with my palms in my hand, no fingers. And I said, well, I can do that. And then I was reading a book. I can do that too. I can go without my fingers if I need to. I don't need them. And but it was not to be. Thanks to General Beast's F-117s, and he was one of them, by the way. They came and attacked our prison that night. And you saw some video, I guess. Hit the side of a building first with one of those bombs, and the Iraqis down at the middle of the building all jumped up and screamed and yelled and ran down to the bottom of the building in the basement there for their hidey hole. And we had about 3 or 4 more sorties of F-117 showing up that night. And if you recall, if you ever done laser-guided bombs on the receiving end of this, it's deadly quiet in there still when the attack leaves, and you can hear the jet noises coming. We go, they're coming back again. And one of the Brits were there. He said, I'm putting my bowl on top of my head. And we all crowded into the corner, and they showed up again that night. And you know, they were dropping those delay fuse bombs, and it went down the bowels for the most part. And you saw one of them, that last hit, that hit right between Colonel Akers' cell and the hallway there, and went right on down. And it hit the prison several times. They were accurate bombing too, General. And you know, it blew bricks out of the wall. It buckled the steel doors to our cells, and all those bricks flying around. But all of us on the top floor, 20-something of us up there, nothing but bruises from all those bombs falling. But when the Iraqis came back up there finally, after the last bombing attack, and there was nothing else evidently inbound, they rounded us all up, one at a time, drug us out down the hallway, down the stairs, down through the basement and up some other stairs to get back out to where a bus was waiting by now for us. And I could see what the damage was. It didn't hurt us, but there were pieces of Iraqis stuck to all the walls in there and little blood blots everywhere. You know, that was the very last interrogation we ever had, was that night before the bombs started hitting our prison. Never interrogated again. But when they drug us out of there, they were mad as hell, and they started beating us up on the way to the bus again. That's their fallback, you know, just beat somebody up. We got on the bus, took us to another prison. And this one here again had these bars with just windows with just bars in them. You could stand up and look outside. And I could see the courtroom down beneath us, and off on the other side of that was building after building after building. It looked like apartment complexes. And one of our fellow POWs was a Colonel Mohammed from Kuwait there, who was an A4 pilot. I asked him later, what was all that? He said, because you could see they were full of people. He told us, these are Saddam Hussein's enemies. He said, everybody that goes against him, or he's suspicious of or a little leery about, he locks that guy up, and doesn't just lock him up, he locks up their entire family and all their clan, their cousins, their uncles, nieces, nephews, the grandparents, the wife, everybody gets locked up. And so that's how he treated his opposition there. We got to look out our window and see on a couple of occasions a couple of guys tied with ropes to a volleyball post in the middle of the courtyard, getting tortured all day long, getting beaten and pulled on and yanked on, and things done to them. This guy screaming like crazy. And then one other bad thing happened there. We saw Larry Slade next door to me was a Navy lieutenant. He was a F-18 driver at the time, pilot. And he was looking out his window one day. He was right next to me looking across. All these Iraqi families locked up over there. And he started waving at them, and they started waving at him. And the Iraqi guards down in this compound who had been torturing that guy tied up to the post, it looked like the Keystone Cops. They all jumped up and took off and ran inside the building. And I said, Larry, they're coming for you, buddy. And they went in his cell door. I started praying for him. They were just beating him unmercilessly for such a long time. I really thought they were going to kill him on that point right there. But they finally stopped. And then we were we were taken to another prison after that, and another old French-looking fort from way back, and it was just crumbling apart. And this one actually had the concrete walls between us, and you could look at it and see little blocks of concrete stuck in the wall. You could pull them out and look through the next cell over there. And as luck would have it, Colonel Akery was thrown in the cell next to me. And that evening, they brought and put another prisoner in with each of us, so we were not in solitary for that one night. And I had one of the Italian pilots in with me, and Colonel Akery had with him the A4 driver, Colonel Mohammed, and just deathly quiet in there. And the food, they give us a couple of pieces of bread a day here, better bread, you know, and a little cup of tea. The tea tasted really delicious. I've always liked that tea. And the bread was chewy and good, what they gave it to us, you know. And they started giving us extra, so I just stack it on the floor next to me. Let it sit there and save it up for later on. But we stayed there for a while. And then one day they came in and said, we're going to another prison. And they loaded us up again and took us out to another prison and put us in a cell. And we stayed there 2 or 3 days. And one day, no bad treatment here. The bad treatment was over since Colonel B's forces blew them to hell and gone. And we stayed there for a while, and the guy opened the door one day in a shabby civilian clothing, much like mine, and he said, I can tell you this, you're going home to your country today. And that was encouraging news. And so they marshaled a bunch of us out into the inner courtyard there and started calling out the names and pointing them over towards where a bus was parked nearby. And they got to my name, and he said, who are you? And I said, Hunter. And he said, psst. They put me back into prison, in the cell again, which I thought, all right, what's going on here? But I knew if they were going, we would be a day or two behind them. And surely enough, when next day arose and they took us down to the end of the hallway and put some big pot of water and let us wash a little bit, gave us a new orange POW uniform to put on, which wasn't torn and shredded and dirty as hell, and gave me a pair of tennis shoes to put on for the first time, and because I was barefooted, gave me some socks. And then they rolled us out into the hallway and would put blindfolds on us, took us down the end of the hallway, out the door, and started loading us on a bus. And we got on a bus and we started traveling, and the Iraqi guards started coming by and taking off our blindfolds. And I was looking at the gent next to me. We started talking, and I had known him for some time, you know, ran across him before, seen him earlier in the POW episode. And I finally said, what's your name? And he says, I'm Colonel Everly. Don't you remember me? I said, God, Colonel, you look like shit. And he was on his last legs, I swear. If he hadn't gotten at it soon, he probably would have died. He was a thin guy to start with, for you that know him. And he was just wasting away. And they took us, as we got on the bus, they sprayed us with this perfume stuff. It was funny. And they took us downtown, turned us over to the International Red Cross at some hotel there. And of course the power was out for the most of the city, but they had generators, so they could have some power there ever so often in the hotel. And there was no food. The Red Cross fed us chocolates. You know, the Swiss International Red Cross, and I guess they're crazy about chocolate, so they kept feeding us chocolate. And they gave us some little tiny bars of soap, and once the generator had been on for 2 or 3 hours, they said the water's warm enough, you can go take a shower. And so we did that, and Aker would come out of the shower and say, how do I look? And I'd make him bend over and look at his scalp. And I said, back in the shower, buddy. You're filthy yet. And just grime ground into his skin, his scalp. And they gave us some toothbrushes too, but not enough, so we just shared toothbrushes there to get our teeth clean for the first time. I didn't care. And at nighttime, it got cold, of course. This is in Baghdad in February, in March now, you know, and they'd turn off the generators after a while, and there'd be no heat. So we all got gathered in separate rooms, you know, a bunch of us, and And we still had all we had was our POW uniforms. And after a while, we'd all climb in, a bunch of us in the same bed, and pile all these things over us, the quilts and blankets we could round up from the other rooms to stay warm, And we all get in the bed, and everybody's going to sleep. And I told Colonel Akery, I said, once before we were in this situation in that third prison where we were all in the same room together. We were in the same room together, this time in a bed together. The next time there better be a woman in here somewhere. So we had a good chuckle about that. Let me back up with another piece of humor here. On the last day of February, the bombing had been steady all night. Some of the bombs were getting a little too close for my comfort. And then the sun came up, and one of the Iraqi guards had come over and was talking to Colonel Mohammed in the cell with Colonel Akery. And he was chattering away, and after he left, it got all quiet again. So I went over and did the old shave and a haircut thing on the wall, and I reached over and pulled my chunk of concrete out so I could look through and see Akery there. And he'd been over, and because he'd been talking to the guards, and I said, well, what's going on? And remember, today's the last day of the month. So he said, well, first of all, today's payday. So that was good, And so he said the Iraqi guard told him the fighting has stopped. And it looks like we're going to be getting out of here maybe pretty soon. So back to when we got out. We were in the last prison, and he took us to the hotel. And the next day, they loaded us up and took us to the airport. And on the way out, you could see the bombing effects of the city, some good accurate bombing. There'd be one place really destroyed, next to it hardly any damage at all. So good accurate bombing. So we got to the airport, and a couple of C9s from Swiss were landed there, Switzerland, International Red Cross. And some Iraqi POWs were getting off that we had captured. And I got to tell you, the viewpoints for the two groups were entirely opposite. They looked like they were scared to death to come back to their country. They were scared of what was going to happen to them, I think. And we were happy as hell, of course. And we got on the plane, and the Red Cross guys were telling us, don't look at the Revolutionary Guards here. Don't give them the finger. Don't do anything to them. So as soon as we took off and got up above the clouds, some Air Force planes, F-16s if I remember right, parked themselves on either side. And they gave us a good escort all the way back. We went to Riyadh, got off one plane, shook a few hands, walked down and got on another plane, went to Bahrain. Then we got off that plane, and they got on a bus, and they took us to the hospital ship out there. And we stayed on there a few days and got some ice cream, and had a good time eating and everything. Got my hair cut. And a few days, and they said, all right, we're heading to the States. So we got on a bus again, went to the airport there at Bahrain, and got on another jetliner and took off and refueling in Ireland, and then went straight into Andrews Air Force Base, all of us together, and landed there, and had a great welcome there. Everybody was there, the Colin Powell and all the big shots were there. Marine Commandant General Gray was there, and good to talk to all those folks. And I had been running into General Gray over and over throughout the years since he was a full colonel, and for some strange reason he took a liking to me. So every time he'd see me, he would talk to me for a while, and see what was going on. And we got there, and he said, Guy, anything I can do for you? And I said, well, I hope you keep the OV-10s. They do a good job for you, And he said, what else? And I said, well, I'm due to retire here pretty soon, my 30-year mark, And he said, I'd like to stay in a little bit longer if you don't mind, because I really enjoyed being in the Marine Corps. And he says, well, I can do both things for you. He says, as long as I'm commandant, we're going to have OV-10s. He was right, but as soon as he got through being commandant, the OV-10s were gone. They disestablished the squadrons, and I helped fly a bunch of them out to the boneyard at Tucson, and then I was in charge of disbanding, decommissioning our squadron, and flew out to the West Coast to observed the decommissioning of the other OV-10 squadron out there. It was a shame that plane went away. It was such a good workhorse plane. And we got through at Andrews Air Force Base and stayed about a week there, I guess, overall. And then they put us on some more planes and flew us back to Camp Pendleton. Oh, all the wives and relatives were there to meet us at Andrews when we got off too. My wife was there and everybody. It was a great feeling to get home. We went back to Pendleton, and I had a month's leave, because the squadron was still hadn't even started coming back yet from Saudi Arabia, Saudi Arabia. And so I started trying to get back in shape by jogging. I used to be a marathon runner in my younger and trimmer days, and started trying to run again. Could run about 100 yards and couldn't make it any further. Couldn't do a single pull-up, at that time I was so weak. But I was gradually getting back into shape, and then the squadron showed back up, and I had to go get another flight physical up chit from the flight surgeon, to start back. So I started flying again. And the next thing you know, they say the more things change, the more they stay the same. Our big thing, is for us, is like red flag. Ours is the CACs, as we call them, Combined Arms Exercises at 29 Palms, California, the big desert. That's what we did. In my career, I counted them up one time. I went to 32 of those things out there. They're all 3 weeks to 6 weeks, So I had a good time. So I'm back at the CACs again. 2 months later, in July, hot as hell in the desert again. And things are the same, it looks like. But there's a couple of funny things this time, though. I was out at the CACs, and we sent an OV-10 over to Camp Pendleton every day to pick up our mail. It was very, very close for us for an airplane flight. And he came back one day with a bunch of mail, and I was sitting there with my feet up on the old field desk outside in one of our hooches, and talking to the dead OIC, a Major Guy Close, and I was reading a letter, and I said, "Holy cow!" And he said, "What is it?" I said, "It's a letter from the Defense Finance Agency." And he said, "Really? And what does it say?" I said, it says that if you're a POW, for every single day you're a POW, you're drawing worldwide rate per diem." He goes, "Really?" He said, "Is there a check in there?" I said, "Yeah, there's a check in here." And he said, "What does it say?" I said, "It says big screen TV." So it was funny to beat the band. But I got back finally after the exercise was over. I got back to Camp Pendleton where we were living on base, and I said, "Mary, get dressed. We're going to Sears. I know where a big screen TV is." She said, "How are you going to pay for that?" And I said, "Look at this. Look at this." So we went out and got that, and went on about our business, started training, and then this was in '91 still. You should understand, and so I was due to retire. This is '92 now, and that's '92 is we all deployed early up to Nellis Air Force Base that year with our entire squadron. And that's when I contacted the F-117s up there, and I said, "I think you're the guys that bombed our prison on this particular night." And they had some guy get on the phone with me, and he looked it up and he said, "Yeah, that was us." And I said, "If you don't mind, look through the FLIR video. I'd like to have that, if you don't mind, for a souvenir." So he sent me the FLIR video and a little letter with it and said, "Here it is." He sent me the whole VHS tape, and he said, "It's right here at the 5-minute mark into it." So I saw your bombing. And I tell you what, General, you're a very accurate bomber. And so my time was up to retire. I got my retirement orders, and we drove back to the East Coast to our house that we owned there, and turned on my phone. I got a call from a friend. He said, "Hey, you know that new rank they're going to have in the Marine Corps, Chief Warrant Officer 5? I said, "Yeah." He said, "You've been selected to the first one. You're number 1 on the list for that new rank." He said, "Well, you got to call Wing right now and tell them you'll take it, because tomorrow is too late." It was the end of my career. So I called them up, and they sent a message to Headquarters Marine Corps, said I accept it. He said, "Well, you got to stay in for 2 more years." And I said, "That's great. No problem." So I had 2 more years in the Marine Corps, and the fun thing was they were shutting down the squadron. We just started doing fun flights. We would load up with rockets and machine gun bullets. You just fly up to the range and just spend all afternoon shooting stuff and shooting machine guns and shooting rockets off the OV-10s. It was a blast, you know. And I'd get to shoot some from the back seat there, you know, and didn't have a trigger in the back seat, but I'd tell the pilot, I'm flying a plane. I'd say, all right, fire, you know. And I use the old, what we call in the OV-10 community, the TLAR bomb sight. Put a little grease point on your window, and that looks about right, the TLAR, and pull the trigger and shoot the rocket. We just had a blast doing that for the last few months, just having the times of our lives, and of course taking cross countries everywhere you can think about. Just flying and flying. It was fun. But I was in charge of decommissioning the squadron, so I had to do that, which is a shame. And then I went back out. Flew out to California and witnessed their decommissioning. And then I helped to fly the planes to the boneyard in Tucson, and it was a sad call when you call tower and say, we're turning base and 3 down and locked, full stop, last stop. So I left that, and then we went, like I said, I was already back at the East Coast there, and retired from the Marine Corps and started doing nothing. My wife says, all you're going to do is nothing? I said, I'm not done yet. So finally she came out of the house one day and she said, look, is this what you're going to do the rest of your life? And I said, I don't know. And she said, here. She had me an application. And my degree was in mathematics. And she said, they're looking for math teachers out at the community college. And so I went out there, and to show you how serious I was, I wore those cargo shorts and flip-flops to the interview. And I walked in there because I didn't care, you know. I walked in there and I talked for about 5 minutes and said, you're hired. I said, holy cow. So I taught math out there for about 6 or 7 years, and I just finally got tired of it, you know, and it was no fun at all. You know, it just wasn't fun. Look, I have a student come in one day, and he would say, am I passing, Mr. Hunter? And I'd say, all right, how many tests have we had? He said, 5. I said, how many of you failed? He said, 3. And I said, what do you think? And but back to the what General Horner said, and the General Peterson, was it? Yes, about air power. And I got to tell you all, since you guys are the driving force for air power, the Air Force, of course, Air Force, and to be on the receiving end of that is demoralizing. You know, with all the bombing. And I think that's what destroyed those people. It just demoralized them and won us that war. And I got to tell you, I hope whatever we do, we never lose sight of the fact that it's not just air superiority we want air supremacy. Because once you got that, you've got the war won. And you guys are going to be doing that. You know, it's not really the Marine Corps, you know. We're committed to like frontline stuff and drinking beer at the club. And you guys are committed to bombing and blowing the hell out of people. And so that works out just right from my viewpoint. I gave a couple of talks up there once or twice at the Memorial Day services, and I just want to bring up another factor. And I mentioned this, the people, I think, who suffer the most is not the POWs during these episodes. It's their family waiting back home because they have no idea what's going on. And one of the things that worried me the most was they were going to kill us over there, and they would never know what happened to me. And my wife, Mary, would go the rest of her life just worrying and wondering. So, and that tells you something there. And so I know that it just terrifies them at heart. And I could tell that too, because when the first night we were back in the States, and went to get undressed to take my shower, you know, and go to bed, and she took a look and saw all those sores and bruise marks all over me. She just burst into tears. But it's a harrowing experience for the families, and I think more so than us who were captured and shot down over there. So that's one of the bad things. But you know, when you there's an old saying, when you take the king's shilling, you do the king's bidding. We signed up for this. I have no regrets about any of it. I've told Mary and lots of folks ever since, I really enjoyed being in the Marine Corps. I enjoyed being a Marine. I enjoyed doing this and going to Vietnam, which, by the way, that was my war, Vietnam. I was over there so much. And but I enjoyed doing it all. If I had my druthers, I'd do it all again, every bit of it. I don't know if we got time for questions, or is there?
We have time for one question.
Really, that's all?
Yes, sir.
They always say I like to hear my voice run. Any questions at all, folks? I'll tell you what I can.
Sir, I'll ask one. Do you keep in touch with former POWs that you've been held captive with?
Yeah, we email back and forth quite a bit. I even talk to them occasionally. The last big gathering we had was in London, and I couldn't make that because, unfortunately, my cancer was back, so I was grounded, sort of. Couldn't get it over. Can't walk very far anymore. And so I just had to miss it. But I still email them back and forth, send them all kinds of great jokes, you know. That's what the internet was invented for, to share jokes. So it was a fun experience, but those guys were great. You know, Jeff Tice, one of the best guys I ever knew, you know. He was swarthy complexion, you know. And the Iraqis thought he was Arabic sometimes, and they'd walk up in front of him and just start speaking Arabic to him, trying to get him to speak some Arab back at him, and they were going to nail him if he did. And the other thing they were doing, they were wondering who amongst us, if there was a Jews amongst us. They made everybody drop trowels and check for circumcisions. Thought I was back in the flight surgeon's office again. But that went by, and there's a couple of them died since we all got back. It's a shame. You know, one guy's wife left him. I guess she couldn't stand the strain or something. But a couple of them were dead, and young guys, Sly Fox, you know, dementia, I guess is what I heard from the folks down at Pensacola. It's a shame. They beat us so bad on the heads that I guess it affected him too much. People ask me once or twice about leadership, and I've told them, and he's got in that little book about my section there, and I'm glad I was thinking along those lines at least with General Horner, because be consistent, you know. Like he said, if you're going to be an animal, but be consistent and be fair. And that's what I learned from Vietnam. And like General Peterson said about your NCOs, you know, they can do lots more than you think they can. I was harking back to Vietnam in 1966. I got off the ship in Da Nang, and I was a corporal when I got off the ship. And I immediately got promoted to sergeant because I was due for it. And the next day they sent me to Saigon, where I joined a unit called Anglico. I don't know if most of you don't know about it, but I went down to Anglico and had a lieutenant colonel there, an aviator by the way, the CO of Anglico. And he says, we got several teams open, but what do you want to do? And I said, I'd like to be a team chief. So he says, all right, you're a sergeant, you got it. And I was a sergeant for one day, and I was a team chief up there in the Nha Trang area in Southern 2 Corps. For a long time, I was a sergeant, and I was a senior Marine within 200 miles of that place, 200 miles of coastline. And I got to run my Naval Gunfire Spot team the way I saw it. And you know what? There was no adult supervision from the Marine Corps on me. So we had a blast up there. We were just shooting naval gunfire left and right all the time up there, anything we get our hands on. Later on, they sent us a Navy lieutenant from the Intrepid carrier. And he was a good guy. We did the same thing. And years later, when he was dying of cancer, he called me up and we just chit-chatted for a few minutes. And he says, I cannot believe they let you and me roam around that country shooting whatever the hell we felt like shooting at for that entire year over there. And I said, yeah, it was glorious, wasn't it? Anyway, that's just another thing. And I was a sergeant doing what was supposed to be a Marine officer's job. And we had several other sergeants doing that up and down the coast in backseat of 01 Bird Dogs, which was a great plane in my estimation. It was fun to fly in that thing. Anyway, enough about leadership for the NCOs. Like he said, give them a chance, they'll do wonders for you. That's my experience on my end. Anything, folks?
Well, Chief Warrant Officer Hunter, I just want to say thank you so much for coming out here today and sharing your incredible experience with us.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
So that will conclude our presentations for today. On behalf of the Air Command and Staff College, we want to give a sincere thanks to General Horner. Thank you, sir. General Feast. Thank you, General Johnson. Thank you, sir. And of course, Chief Warrant Officer Hunter. At this time, I'm going to ask you guys to stand by, and we will escort our Eagles and their distinguished and their guests out. Thank you.